You've got questions? She's got answers. It's Ask Nurse Lisa.
Hey, it's Nurse Lisa, and welcome to this edition of Ask Nurse Lisa. We have an important news bulletin episode for you today. I would not have taken my time here on this Saturday to make this news bulletin if it didn't affect everybody. And by everybody, that means you. So I hope that you will watch till the end of this video, will pay attention to everything I'm talking about because, as I said, it affects everyone within the sound of my voice. What is on our subject today? What is such an important news bulletin? Superbugs. And I'm not talking about cockroaches that you can't kill with a spray. I'm talking about drug-resistant bacteria, and there are very many types of bacteria that have formed serious drug resistance. In fact, their drug resistance is so strong that the later antibiotics that have been designed to eliminate them are very toxic to humans and very dangerous to humans, and at very least have some very terrible side effects. But even those medications are very, very toxic. And sometimes they won't even work. Antibiotic therapy over the years has saved a lot of lives, including mine. I got pneumonia, a very bad case of pneumonia, in 1979. New Year's Eve, as it was turning 1980. It was so severe I was hospitalized for weeks. The antibiotic therapy saved my life along with the respiratory therapy, but I probably wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for that antibiotic therapy. But there's been many reasons why over the last several decades that antibiotic use and misuse has turned the organisms that we knew of yesterday into the superbugs that we know of today. One of the alarming reasons that I chose to come on screen this Saturday instead of spending time doing other things, one of the things that alarmed me about the news this week was the absolute number of drug-resistant organisms now found in our meat supply that you buy at the grocers. Over half of the meat supply has been found to be tainted with drug-resistant bacteria. What does that mean to you? It means you might want to pay some extra money to go to a store which sells organic meat products. I'm not saying that guarantees you any better of a chance, because I'm not the one that stuck those labels on that meat. So, that being said, let's talk about ways to handle those meat products and keeping ourselves as safe as possible. The first thing I want to talk about is making sure the meat is cooked thoroughly. That just should go without saying, at a temperature high enough to cook the meat thoroughly and long enough to cook the meat thoroughly. Second, food preparation skills are becoming even more critical. With these organisms on the meat, alive and ready to do such destruction, it's very important to wash your hands before and after handling the meat in any way, even just opening the package, okay, is a recipe for spreading this bacteria to you and your skin. And some of the bacteria is staph bacteria, which can cause very, very serious infections. So, even just opening up the package of meat, wash hands before and after, disinfect, don't just wipe down, but disinfect every surface that comes in contact with the meat or your hands that have touched the meat. In other words, if you use a dirty hand to turn on the faucet, disinfect the faucet too. Make sure you use the hot water, the real hot water cycle on your dishwasher. Make sure there's nothing left on your pots and pans. No residue left on your pots and pans. That being said, let's talk about getting the infections in other ways. And let's talk about what's going on with these infections and what to do to help this alarming process. First of all, realize that there's a huge difference between bacteria and viruses. Antibiotic therapies are not used to treat viral infections, fungal infections, or anything else. They're supposed to be used for bacterial infections. So when you go to a doctor and he's decided that you have a viral infection, don't be disappointed if there is not a medication to help you that will actually kill the infection. Don't be surprised if he gives you medications just to help you with your symptoms. If by chance you are prescribed an antibiotic of any kind for any reason, take the entire dosage as prescribed. If for whatever reason you cannot do that, contact your doctor immediately. It's that important. You have to make sure that your infection is treated and treated completely. Even these precautions are not enough to completely stop the development and the continued escalating crisis of drug resistance in these organisms, but they're some of the main reasons, and it's the main stockpile that we have of guns to help slow this process down. The development of antibiotics and new antibiotics is costly, time-consuming, and several pharmaceutical companies have gotten out of the business of developing new antibiotic therapy. Drug research is a very difficult business as it is, but there's got to be some other ideas coming down the pike to help with the problem of bacterial infections. Because right now, the strongest antibiotics that we have are very, very toxic and very, very difficult on the patients. And there's no guarantee that they will cure. Store your antibiotics properly. Do not share your antibiotics with anyone else. That was one of the major problems, is that someone would get sick, they'd be prescribed antibiotic therapy, they would not take but half of their medicine, and then they'd leave it in the medicine counter in their medicine cabinet, and somebody else would take it, would take the rest of it. That has gone on a lot, and that kind of stuff needs to stop. Number one, antibiotics do not have a long shelf life as far as potency, and can actually become very toxic. So it's very, very important that you take your medicine as prescribed. Now, before you tell me that I'm the little girl crying wolf, I'm going to share with you my personal story regarding drug-resistant bacteria. Years ago, when my children were babies, they got a strep ear infection. Children get ear infections all the time. Children are taken to doctors and they're prescribed antibiotic therapy for those infections all the time. Well, for some reason, my children's ear infections were not clearing up. We were on the 4th antibiotic. They ended up being taken off antibiotic therapy and had tubes placed in their ears. Their ears, of course, healed eventually, and hearing damage was averted for the most part. I think they might have had a little hearing damage due to the month-long bout with the infection. But they did cultures of the infection and found that it was a drug-resistant strep bacteria. It's very, very scary. Very, very scary. And if we had really known what it was earlier, they could have had the surgery earlier and we wouldn't have gone through a whole month of being sick. But that was not the end of the story. Years before my kids got sick, I had suffered a major head trauma. This head trauma caused a fracture to go from the back of my head to my left ear. This left me completely deaf in my left ear, and it also left an opening to my spinal cord. So while I was in the hospital for the head trauma for a month, I quickly got meningitis because there was an opening from the outside from my ear canal all the way into my brain and spinal cord. I have no idea what organism got me that time. I do know that it took me weeks of fever and feeling very sick to get better, but at that point I didn't know what that particular organism was that gave me meningitis. I just knew that I had gotten it there at the hospital. Fast forward to 6 years later, when my children were toddlers with that resistant strep bacteria organism, and I woke up in the middle of the night with meningitis again. For you see, my neurosurgeon said that surgery was no longer necessary 6 years before that because the infection of meningitis had closed up the opening to the brain and the spinal cord. And, you know, I was glad that he didn't think I needed surgery at the time. Well, getting the meningitis 6 years later because that opening was not closed was a real wake-up call. But the organism that gave me the meningitis was the organism that I had been exposed to from my kids, an antibiotic-resistant strep bacteria. I was on 4 different types of IV antibiotics in the hospital, and I was in the hospital for quite a while, and they weren't sure I was going to make it. There was no guarantee that I was going to make it. Now, my story is sort of an unusual one, but I feel very lucky to be in front of this camera today after going through what I went through. But the problem is, these infections, they're not confined to the hospitals and nursing homes. They affect everybody. So it's time to do your part. We expect that the scientific community will do their part to try to take care of this horrific problem, but we've got to do our part. So, until next time, it's Nurse Lisa saying be happy, be healthy, and if you have a question for Nurse Lisa, send it to asknurselisa@yahoo.com. That's asknurselisa@yahoo.com.